Thank you all for coming. I see some of our neighbors from philosophy, so may not know me as well. My name is Aref Ali Nayed, and I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering here at the University of Guelph. Very excited and delighted to have a very, very special speaker today, Dr. Aref Ali Nayed. I don't know where to begin to introduce Dr. Aref. I can stretch my arms wide and stretch more, but it goes more breadth than that. But I will try. Dr. Nayed is chairman of Kalam Research and Media and a leading Libyan scholar, diplomat, entrepreneur, and interfaith leader, and more things that I missed. He is a triple alumnus of the University of Guelph. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Biological Engineering in 1985 here in Guelph Engineering, then went on to get a Master's of Arts in Philosophy of Science in 1986 and a PhD in Philosophy in 1994. Dr. Nayed has taught at various institutions globally, and he's a recognized voice in philosophy, theology, and ethics. He has served as Libya's ambassador to the United Arab Emirates and is founder of the Libya Institute for Advanced Studies. His work bridges science, engineering, and the humanities with a focus on how technology and philosophy can be harnessed for peace, compassion, and the common good. Dr. Nayed will explore how engineering is not only about technical craft, but also about engaging with the world through operational artifacts, objects, systems, and processes that embody intentionality, commands, algorithms, and possibilities for action. He will introduce his framework of operational hermeneutics to show how artifacts are not passive tools, but active carriers of meaning, responsibility, and ethical consequence. In an age of artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, his lecture highlights the importance of cultivating engineers and thinkers who can integrate technical excellence with ethical reflection. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Aref Ali Nayed back at the University of Guelph.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time from your busy schedules to join us here. It has been a very emotional and nostalgic day. I came to this university in 1983 at a quite young age and stayed in it for quite some time, and carried the university in my heart throughout all these years. And it's a special honor and privilege to be back here, especially at the engineering school, which was the first school I came into, and but also to see the philosophy building and to see the library, to see it really brings back memories, and it's amazing. So I thank Dean Munsif and I thank Chris and all the team that have built an amazing schedule in a very short time span. We've managed to cover a lot of ground, and I hope that this will open doors of cooperation between the University of Guelph and several institutions that I work with across the ocean in the Middle East and in Europe as well. Let me begin the talk. I have actually written a paper and I summarized the paper, but I'm going to dispense with all this. I'm just going to talk straight to you. And then if I get too nervous, I was telling my niece that even after 40 years, I still get nervous talking to people. But if I do get nervous, then I will read out stuff. But I will try not to get nervous. Okay? There is a very old distinction that we all grow up with, and that is the distinction between natural things and artificial things. And artificial intelligence is just one of the last artificial things to pop up in our lives. And it is very important when studying about artificial intelligence and the ethics of artificial intelligence, and I recognize here the presence of AI ethicists and the center, which is a pioneering center here in Guelph, and the interdisciplinary programs you have about AI and the philosophy of AI and data science and so on. when we study these things, it's important to talk about artificiality itself. What does it mean for something to be artificial? And what does it mean for something to be an artifact? You know, the Greeks long ago made certain distinctions. And whatever Aristotle said tends to stick. So many distinctions that we take for granted are actually Aristotelian distinctions. Aristotle long ago made a distinction between things that are just natural and what he called techne, or things that are made. And he noticed certain things about made things. He actually studied made things. So he said, when I make this bottle, for example, I make it from a material, which is the material cause. I put it in a certain mold or form, and that is the formal cause. I'm the one who is doing this, so I'm the agent. And I do it in order to have a drinking bottle, so there is a teleological or a reason for making it. These four causes tend to be associated with any artifact, even artificial intelligence. So what Aristotle had to say about artifacts is still relevant. However, Aristotle also left us with a very Greek prejudice against crafts and things made. There was, for a very long time in history, a preference for theoretical things over made things. And people who did theoretical things were seen as superior to people who did crafty things, who made things. So the crafts for a long time did not have the respectability that theoretical stuff had. So mathematicians and people who did geometry and who did philosophy saw themselves as somehow superior to people who were doing crafts, you know, carpenters and plumbers and metal workers. It is not until the Industrial Revolution where the engineers begin to get the kind of respectability that used to be reserved to the theatricians. So the Greeks had this prejudice towards the theoretical over the poetical, in the sense of poetical in the original sense of the word poesis, making. Aristotle makes a distinction. He says that human activity falls into three categories. Theoria. By the way, I'm showing off my iron ring, which I just got today because I lost mine back in the 90s, and I'm very grateful for this. Okay, so I will do these gestures to show off. So he says that there are three categories of human activities: theoria, or contemplation; praxis, which is doing things; and then poesis, which is making things, from which we get the word poetry, because we're making poems. Okay, we're making things. So Aristotle made this distinction, but he very much favored theoria. As a matter of fact, in the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 10, he says that the ultimate human activity is this theoretical activity. It isn't until the Middle Ages, both in the Islamic world and in the Christian world, that we get some attention to the made. Some of the Muslim philosophers, like Ibn Khaldun in his great Muqaddimah, speaks of san'a, or craft, and he speaks of masnu'at, those things that are made. And Qalaqashandi, who was a great rhetorician, wrote a book called Subh al-A'sha, in which he speaks about the craft of writing. And he sees the letters that a government writes, for example, as acts and operations, activities that the governor does through the writing. So he sees the texts as craft-created things, artifacts, if you like. In the Italian Renaissance, which picks up these themes from Muslim Sicily and Andalusia, you get this development further advanced, especially in Leonardo da Vinci with his notion of opus, which then gets into Bacon, and the notion of crafting things and making things, and the artisan who makes through his art artifacts becomes important. So important that by the time we get to Giambattista Vico, you get the notion that factum, that which is made, as the only thing that we can know, as Giambattista says. This stuff about the made, the artifact, gets fairly neglected because of idealism, because of Cartesian stuff, until you get the Industrial Revolution, and then you get people like Frederick Taylor talking about manufacturing and doing, until you get, it's a long history, you get into Herbert Simon and his amazingly important book, The Science of the Artificial. And it's not a coincidence that Simon is one of the founders of artificial intelligence. And in that book, Simon says that design, the making of things, is an extremely important human activity, and that there should be a study of artifacts as artifacts, that they're not just mere things. This point was very important, and it is something I learned about here at this college actually, back in the 1980s, where Peter Chisholm, God bless his memory, was teaching us design courses, Design 1 and Design 2. And he was saying that it was essential for engineering that you make things. And you make things in order to solve problems. That's how he put it, you know. And I was very much touched by this idea of making and how engineering is about making. And sure enough, I did very well in the design courses and did horribly in the analysis courses. It was more synthetic than analytic, I guess. But I still managed to get the degree in 1985. So Simon, when he talks about the science of the artificial, does a fairly good job, but it's quite eclectic. He kind of picks up what he does in theory of organizations. He picks up stuff that he did in economics. He picks up stuff that he did in the early artificial intelligence with symbolic systems. But it's not quite a rigorous, unified framework. There are other people coming from another field, which is philosophy, who paid attention to the artifact, okay? Not just Aristotle, and even like there are periods like the Scottish Enlightenment, you get people like Thomas Reid who did a bit on that. But you begin to get stuff on the artifact and the ontology of the artifact coming from the school of Brentano and Husserl, and the student of Husserl called Roman Ingarden, who's Polish. Roman Ingarden speaks about the artifact as a stratified being and tries to describe what an artifact is. Okay? And he begins to say that the being of an artifact is very different from the being of just anything, like natural things or inert things, that the artifact is somehow special. Nikolai Hartmann, the neo-Kantian, also does in his ontology, he has an ontology of levels of being, and one of the levels of being, he says the level of being of artifacts. Okay? So he does a bit of that. Okay? In the late 80s and then early 90s, picking up from insights that I got from Peter Chisholm and the notion of the design and reading Simon's book early on, I began to think that there was a real need for an ontology of artifacts. Okay? And when I did hermeneutics, which is the theory of interpretation, I began to see the text as an artifact, but not just an inert artifact. I began to see the text as an operational artifact. Okay? What is the difference between a mere artifact and an operational artifact? This is an artifact. But if I have a fan, and I'm sorry I didn't bring one along. If I have these portable fans, these very nifty portable fans you use, they're familiar in the Gulf because it's so hot, I guess you don't need them here. But these little portable fans, or let us use the example of a portable, what do you call it, the electrical toothbrush, for example, okay? This is an example of an operational artifact. And car engine is an operational artifact. An escalator is an operational artifact. What's weird about operational artifacts is they actually act, they actually operate, they actually do things. But this artifact, it also does things, no? At a minimum, this artifact says, here I am. When you open your eye, you don't need to make an effort to see things. Things just say, here I am. There is a givenness to the world, okay? So each thing, even inert things, even inert artifacts actually operate at a minimum level by doing self-presentment to you. But operational artifacts do a lot more. They brush your teeth. They elevate you in the elevator. They escalate you on the escalator. They drive you in the car. So these operational artifacts operate. But when they operate, they don't operate haphazardly. They usually operate because of engineers, like the ones graduating from the school, designing those operations, or to be more precisely, the operativity into these systems. So we take inert pieces of an engine and we put them in such a way so as to be able to burn a certain liquid, and then through the energy move certain parts so that we actually begin to move. So there is an intended operativity that's actually built into the artifact. This is weird when you think about it, because it's as if human intention is getting embedded into inert things, into iron, you know, or into plastic. Even at the inert artifact level, the intention of drinking is built into this very bottle. The intention of containing the liquid is built into the very injection molding process and the design and so on. The notion of embedded intentionality is extremely important, especially today when we talk about artificial intelligence. You know, when I get, now there's something which is called AI artifacts. And AI artifacts could be a text that I generate through ChatGPT. It could be a painting that an artificial intelligence creates. It could be a piece of music that an artificial intelligence program actually generates. These artificial intelligence artifacts, they operate. But whose intentionality is embedded in these artifacts? Like, I know that the intentionality of driving a car is built into the Mercedes engine because Mercedes engineers did that. But who is building the intentionality into the AI artifact? These language models that we're using. What intentionality is embedded in them? Is it a zillion intentionalities of all the texts that these models are actually using in a statistical way in order to generate meaningfulness? Or is it the intentionality of the model builder? Or is it the intentions of all the people who created the data on which the model was trained? Whose intentions are embedded in the artificial intelligence artifact? And how does it operate? What are the factors that make this artificial intelligence artifact operate? And what kind of operations can it do? Okay. In the early 1990s, I wrote my thesis in this university. So I went from engineering to philosophy of science in this university, and then the PhD was written in this university. And I created something which I called operational hermeneutics, in which I proposed that a text is like a machine, that it is actually an operational artifact, and that it actually operates. And that in studying interpretation, we need to take that into account. That texts are not inert things upon which we can impose our meanings. And it was very fashionable that the author was dead and that I could do anything I want to do with the text. You know, and it's funny that some philosophers who said that the author was dead sued people when they tried to print their books without their permission, you know. So I wanted to save authorial intention at the time, but not in a psychologistic way. So I developed this notion of embedded intentionality into the text. I proposed that the operational hermeneutics which I developed in those early years is actually of direct applicability to the artifacts that are generated by artificial intelligence. And I won't bother you with all the gory details of that framework, but I'll just share with you a few key insights. One of them is that in engaging an operational artifact, there are actually at least 4 modes of dealing with the artifact. I call them actuating, utilizing, analyzing, and actualizing. Okay? You know, I've been trained by medieval scholars, and so I like these typologies, you know, like the medievals. What are these things? Let us take the fan, you know, with the portable fan. I can actuate the portable fan by switching it on. If I just switch it on, it actually operates. And most texts and artifacts that we get from AI, all I need to do is to read it. And when I read it, it acts upon me. So this is just basic actuation. What is utilizing? Utilizing is when I actually take the document and use it to accomplish something. So for example, a preacher in a church or a mosque takes a sacred scripture and uses it to preach certain values. That is utilizing. Okay? What is analyzing it? Analyzing it is when I say, this text through redaction analysis has come from 4 sources. Source A, source B, source C. This is analytical work that I can do on the artifact. Actualizing is when I read the text, for example, and say, I want to live this. I want to live the Sermon on the Mount, or I want to live Surah An-Nur, or I want to live this particular hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or I want to live this part of the Torah or the Talmud, or so on, or the Upanishads, whatever. Okay? So these are different ways of engaging the operational artifact. So when AI generates an artifact, especially generative AI, it's called generative AI because it generates, okay? So it generates and brings forth these artifacts. Bear in mind that these things are not inert. They do stuff. As Austin in his speech act theory, in his wonderful book, How to Do Things with Words, that even when it's just a text, these words are actually lurking there doing things. And they're doing things not in a haphazard way. They're doing things according to an inherent design, an embedded intentionality, and sometimes set of intentionalities within the artifact. So when I'm engaging with the output of AI, how am I engaging with it? I can simply use this chat GPT document and in terms of just reading it, that's actuating it. I can use it as in the sense of utilizing it to accomplish certain things, that's utilizing it. I can take it apart and say, how does this fit together? Analyze it, and maybe it can affect my life and I can actualize it in my life. So what I'm trying to say is, we must be aware that first of all, the outputs of AI are not inert. They're not just sets of symbols. They are not just dead inert things. They're actually operative artifacts that do different things depending on how we engage them. And that there are different modes of engaging these artifacts. Not only this, we kind of always use operational artifacts to actually accomplish projects of our own. In many ways, I think we are such makers that maybe even the theoretical and the practical that Aristotle distinguished from the poetical or the making function can be subsumed under the making. In many ways, when I think, I'm actually making new states of affairs in my mind. And when I do things in the world, I am making new states of affairs in the world. So we're always making, despite ourselves. We make noise, we make meaning, we make sense, we make narrative, we make ideas, we make syntheses, we make analysis, but we're always making. Now supposing if we are makers, that we're involved into a kind of a manufacturing concern all the time, then what is the engagement of operational artifacts in our lives? It is more like manufacturers going to purchase elements that get into their manufacturing. So when you're approaching an AI artifact, you're actually kind of buying services from the artifact. You're utilizing the labor power, to put it in Marx terms. You're using the labor power of this entity which is operating in order to make certain transformations in your life and in the lives of others, so that you're always in a making project. And these AI artifacts are not only not inert, they actually become raw material as operations, as labor released into your own making projects. So there is no engagement of AI artifacts that's actually neutral, in the sense that you're always somehow implicated in a making project. It's very important to realize what you're doing as you're doing that. To realize that these AI products are actually active, that they're not passive, and that there are clusters of operations that are intended, maybe not humanly intended, maybe not simply intended, maybe intended in a complex way, but there is always intentionality and even I would dare say even volition embedded in these artifacts. Not only this, but as you actuate them and analyze them and utilize them and actualize them, you're doing this because you are always in a project of making. Now, what are the implications of all this? Why are we saying all this stuff? it has huge implications. If the products of AI are operational artifacts, which means that would mean that they belong to the domain of action. And because they belong to the domain of action, they will have to be subsumed under the domain of ethics and morality. And because the engagement of operational artifacts is itself a kind of making, again, it belongs to the domain of action. And because it belongs to the domain of action, it belongs to the domain of ethics, which means that we're involved with a set of operations and actions being utilized as a set of actions in a world of actions, full of action, in environments of action, in communities of action, in cultures of action, in languages that are operating systems for action and not just inert rules. Language is not just rules. Language is more like operating systems on which algorithms run. And these things that are produced are actually active in a very active world. So it's a buzzing world full of action. What does that entail? It entails that one of the most serious things we have to do is to pay attention to the ethics of AI. So I commend the University of Guelph in what's called the Toronto-Waterloo Corridor, okay? Which is an annoying name, okay? The Toronto-Waterloo Corridor of AI. I believe that you should hold the supreme position in this corridor, because by focusing on AI ethics and the philosophy of AI, you're actually providing thought leadership, moral leadership, ethical leadership, political leadership in the good sense of politics, like the politics of Aristotle, the politics of the polis, okay? And you're guiding this whole thing. So it's not about just writing Python or doing fancy large language models. It's about living in this world, being active in this world, making a new world. And the question of what kind of world are we making becomes a very important question. And for this, you cannot just do it with engineering. You have to do it with the philosophers. And the philosophers and the engineers have to talk to each other. You have to do it with the artists who create things. You have to do it with the musicians, with the artisans, with the craftsmen and craftswomen. You have to do it with the politicians and the policymakers. You have to do it within community. You have to do it with faith leaders and interfaith leaders. And I had the privilege of sitting with some of the interfaith leaders in this university. There is a communal effort. What Hosea Royce, in his amazing late books, called a community of interpretation. There is a community of interpretation that has to encompass all this and has to guide all this, so that artificial intelligence is not just about technical competence or engineering competence. It is about moral living and making a better world. And the engineers will understand their real vocation. And one of the privileges I had of studying in this university is that early on this university, because of its farming background, because of its forestry background, because of animal care background, because of environmental concerns, this university in particular, the engineering school, even in the time I studied here, was a humanistic engineering school. It was an engineering school that produced people who cared. And the fact that you call your Center for AI Ethics Care is extremely important. You must not lose this. And this university must uphold this. And this is your niche. This is where you can be superior to Waterloo and to Toronto. And I'm glad their rankings are not so high anymore, even in the so-called valuations. Guelph can shine in this environment. And Guelph can shine across the globe. In Oxford, they have a Center for AI Ethics. In the UAE, there is a university called the Mohammed bin Zayed University for AI, and they're also working on ethics. I sit on the board of the Mohammed bin Zayed University for the Humanities, and we're trying to do joint work with them on the ethics of AI. You can use this in order to not only shine in Canada, but across the globe. And I am really privileged and honored to have graduated 3 times from this university in engineering, philosophy of science, and philosophy. And I see it as a real joy to kind of launch this project of trying to apply operational hermeneutics to AI and its products, AI artifacts. And I extend my hand in cooperation to you. Anything that we can work on together on AI ethics, I'd be more than happy to do so, and to help develop the relationship between Guelph and other universities globally. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I give you a sample of what I wanted to say, and I will publish this monograph and send it to you, inshallah, so you can distribute it. Thank you for your attention. Yeah.